Hi, everyone. It's Eric. Wanted to let you know that this episode is going to be guest hosted by Hattie Hawks. And you may remember Hattie from previous episodes that we've done. And she's fabulous. She's got some great insights, some ideas that she wants to get out to our audience, being you, as well as her audience. And we're so excited about what she's going to bring to the Spirit of EQ podcast. And we hope that you'll recommend it to others.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Hattie Hawks. I'm so glad to be here with you today. And it was a joy getting to be introduced on this show just a while ago by Eric. And so he's not with us today. He is in spirit, as always, on the Spirit of EQ podcast. And today I'm going to delve into a story that is actually very personal to me. I told you on the show last time that I had complex PTSD. We talked a lot about what that meant, how it showed up in my life, and how it really impacts a lot of people, and they may not really even realize it. And so today I am just super excited that, the stars aligned here. And one of the people who I think is best to talk about this was available, and that's Dr. Ken Yeager. He started the STAR program at OSU, which is a huge space for, I want to say, trauma recovery and helping people to get to a better place in their life. And he has done a ton of research. He has been in the trauma space. He is retired now, but he is joining us today remotely to talk a little bit about trauma, how that impacts our emotional state, how it can show up. And we're gonna do it through the lens of my own experience. So, Dr. Ken Yeager, thank you so much for being able to join me today.
Thank you for the opportunity and for inviting me to join you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. I met Dr. Ken Yeager, just so everyone knows, I met him several years ago. I was a reporter for the local news in Columbus, Ohio, and I was doing a story on the STAR recovery, the STAR program at OSU. I'm not exactly sure what brought me there, but when I sat in the office with Dr. Yeager, he spoke so much truth to me as I was listening, and he was telling me about, what is trauma? How does it work? How does it hurt people's lives? And then what is it that they are doing? I remember leaving and being like, wow, this is like a really big thing. Talking to my photographer, I'm like, this is an amazing thing. This is going to be great. And at the time I was thinking, I was primarily thinking more about military, first responders, people who I knew had experienced severe trauma because that's their job. They're running into it. I didn't think that I was going to fall into the category of somebody who had complex trauma at the time. That's so, in hindsight, being able to see that, I'm like, wow, what foreshadowing I had in my own life that I didn't realize at the time. And so, for me, when I found out that I had PTSD, at the time, given everything that was going on in my life, it made sense that I had dealt with some really stressful things. I don't know if I was self-aware enough to understand the magnitude of what I'd experienced, but I knew okay, it makes sense that I'm struggling a little bit emotionally, and I'm having trouble with remembering things. I'm having trouble with keeping organized. And it really just, for me, I felt like it was ADHD. And I ultimately found out that, I have ADHD, but I also have complex PTSD. So that when you look at a brain like that, you're like, oh gosh, what is going on in there? And it has been fascinating, but I want to know from your experience when working with trauma, first of all, just go ahead and explain for us what it even is, in the simplest way that you can. And then I want you to share a little bit about just your experience in helping people to work through it.
Sure. In its simplest form, trauma is the psychological reaction that an individual has when they are put in dangerous, difficult, even life threatening situations. Doesn't necessarily have to be your life that's threatened. It could be the lives of others, as first responders experience, as people in the military experience, as healthcare providers experience. And it leads to a grouping of symptoms that usually are defined by mental health care professionals by a constellation of symptoms, the grouping of symptoms over what period of time and what impact does it have on the individual's life. So it's very interesting that you had said that oftentimes people don't realize that they've been traumatized. That's absolutely the case. People can live and function for years without the realization that the things that have been roadblocks for them all along have been the end result of trauma. And it's not unusual that we find other reasons to blame for what's going on with us, or other reasons that we use to explain what's going on with us. Um, Essentially, though, the mechanism is when a person's been traumatized, that tape plays in the background of our brain at a preconscious level. And it leads to hypervigilance. Subtly, ubiquitously, we begin to view the world as a much less safe place. We begin to think about how it is we can protect ourselves. And again, this is not playing in the forefront, it's playing in the background.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is in the frontal part, the frontal lobe of the brain where executive functioning occurs, the bandwidth narrows. And the bandwidth narrows because we're trying to figure out A, how to keep ourselves safe, B, how to compensate for this narrowing bandwidth that we can't really explain outwardly, and how to just be able to keep functioning on a day to day basis. So things that begin to go fairly quickly are memory, organizational skills, being able to demonstrate higher levels of executive functioning, like solving problems, making decisions, arriving to appointments, getting all of our life elements put together. And a lot of people describe it kind of as a brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had that around recently with trauma. I'm sorry, I'm in the brain fog of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we don't really look for it and say, oh, gee, my neurotransmitters aren't firing exactly right
Yeah.
because I've been traumatized recently. Nobody ever says that.
I'm about to.
Now,
Like
yeah,
I honestly, I'm right up there. I'm like, I'm struggling to explain this. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull out the neuroscience because you can't argue me there and just shut it right down.
yeah,
Yeah.
the neuroscience, does not lie.
No.
And the frontal lobe is in control of all of the things that are executive functioning. And it's very subtle. And in the case that you described with complex trauma occurs simply, the most simply put, when people who are supposed to protect you actually cause harm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of the demarcation line between trauma and complex trauma, because it's much more entailed to that. There are much many other factors that play
Right.
into that. But in its simplest form, in its simplest description, people who are supposed to protect you actually harm you.
And
And
oh, go ahead. Go ahead because I'll jump in.
okay, and it's that causes further confusion in the brain. And it causes greater levels of emotional hypersensitivity, of hypervigilance, of how do I stay safe, of seeing the world as a much more dangerous place because now you don't know who you can trust
Mm-hmm.
to protect you.
Right.
So those are some of the factors that play into this.
And I just want to bring up, because when you say the people who are supposed to protect you, they end up harming you. I do want to have a little conversation around this, because I think sometimes when this part of the conversation comes up, it makes it harder for parents to, like, if your child is coming and recognizing that they're experiencing some of these things, like, it can be a really hard conversation to have, because a lot of times we're like, well, my parents are the reason for my problems. And, we grow up and we can struggle there. And in some cases, I'm sure you could argue that in many cases that there are parents who are most certainly not able to give their children what they need, and even behave badly. And do cause that trauma. There's also, I'm sure, ways that it can happen inadvertently, whereas the intention was not of harm, but the result was harmful. Does that make sense? Is that in line with how that can happen early on?
Absolutely. So, and I love the way that you said it. It's not a malicious action. It's that people that you oftentimes that you look to and respect as being those folks in the community that are supposed to protect you, that under certain circumstances, they are not able to protect you, and that causes trauma.
And
so, for example, a person who is in the bank and a bank robbery occurs, and they're expecting somebody to come and save them, and nobody shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that triggers all kinds of feelings of abandonment. Family members in healthcare settings where doctors and nurses are highly respected, and they expect the doctors and nurses to miraculously heal somebody who is just coded, when in fact only 10% of codes are successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also true of first responders. We've seen these visions on television where somebody has a heart attack and they do a minute of chest compressions, and the person pinks up and they sit up and they start talking right away. That's not real.
Right.
And that's a subtle expectation, but when it doesn't occur, it's traumatic. There's a traumatic loss. There's this feeling that the people that were supposed to save and protect didn't save and protect, when in fact it was beyond their ability to save and protect. But still, a person's perception is a person's perception. So you're absolutely, so you're absolutely correct. So it's not oftentimes, it's not that complex trauma is a relic of an intentional act, but rather it's the result of an act that the individual did not anticipate or expect or could not prepare for.
And ultimately, changed their outlook on, is it life in general, or is it more of it just kind of changes the way you think and feel about certain things? So if you did see that happen, if you were traumatized by the fact that a doctor was not able to save someone, or if it was something like that, how may you internalize that? And what are some thoughts that people would walk away with after that? How may they? So then, do you have a bias against doctors, or maybe you afraid of hospitals after that? Trauma manifests itself in so many ways, so I'm sure you can't say exactly how someone may experience it, but in your experience with people who have that kind of complex trauma, how does it start to change their life?
It's fascinating because there are many responses to trauma as there are individuals.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own unique response to trauma. But when it comes to treating trauma, it's a matter of taking a look at what that person's perceptions are and exploring how they're manifesting in that person's life. Um, we do a lot of work at the Trauma Recovery Center with victims of violent crime and individuals who have been physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, and what have you. And as the mind tries to sort out what happened, the individual manufactures memories. And they manufacture memories around somehow it being their fault.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to hear things like, it's all my fault. I should have, if I'd only.
Mm-hmm.
And those are kind of the key tip to the clinicians working with the victims. And a reset, a reframing is, this is not your fault. You're the victim. It is not your fault that the person died. You're the victim of having watched that loss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not your fault. And you should, to say that I should have gotten the person to the hospital sooner, I should, if I'd only called the doctor, it's all my fault that I didn't follow through.
Right.
Those are not real. It's your ability to try to somehow make sense out of a circumstance that absolutely makes no sense to you.
Right. We tend to try to control the narrative. We try to have a sense of control over the things that happen to us, and for our own sense of protection. But it ends up being the opposite of that.
It absolutely does. And the interesting thing is trauma is one of those conditions that tells you that there's nothing wrong with you.
Mm.
It's one of the self-reinforcing conditions that says, no, I'm okay. I just need to be stronger, or I just need to do this better, or I just need to go here. And it's very hard to accept that what I've done or what I've experienced is impacting my ability to function negatively.
I would say that trauma is almost like a perfectionist playground, because if you're constantly trying to be perfect or respond the right way or figure it out, and then if you don't do it right, then you beat yourself up. There are a lot of people who do that, and I don't know if they would necessarily be like, well, I have trauma. They would just say, that's just my personality.
Correct. Trauma is self-reinforcing. So, if you feel like you're making progress in an area, then it's self-reinforcing. But then when you realize that everything falls apart, then the natural response is to beat yourself up, which again, in an odd way, is self-reinforcing.
It's so, to hear you talk about it, it's so interesting, because a lot of us receive trauma because in certain ways we get beat up, whether it's emotionally, psychologically, or physically. There's an element of feeling as if you've just been really hurt, and something has, like we said, traumatically harmed you. And then after that, we do it to ourselves. We continue to reinforce it, and it becomes a cycle in our minds. And then it starts to infiltrate other parts of our life. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I can say from my own life experience that there are several points, large traumas for me. Some of it involving sexual assault, some of it involving psychological abuse, which I know that there is not enough, there's not enough awareness of that because psychological abuse is really tricky. It's really sneaky. And it changes your brain so much over time. I can tell you that the way that I felt about life when I was younger versus how I have felt in the last few years. Now, it's not all just like psychological abuse from one person, but more of like certain life experiences as well that culminated me to the place that I'm at now, which is like in a very, very active healing stage. I've come a long way. I'm able to talk about some of this stuff without sending me into a tailspin of shame. Whereas before, I couldn't even pretend that certain things happened. Like I couldn't go there. I would be hit with like little flashes of memory of it. So I'd be triggered, but I wouldn't quite understand even what was happening. And I would just shut that down entirely. And so like, that's the cycle that I went in. Other people go in different ways. And I'm sure that you would argue that like trauma is a relationship killer. It can prevent you from thriving in many areas of your life. So just talk a little bit about that and how some may be able to identify trauma in their life because of those cycles, if they could just get to a point where they're really paying attention to what they're doing and how they're making choices and the emotions that they experience every day.
So, as you were talking, the one thing that kept coming to my mind is the cumulative nature of trauma. And we have this tendency to think of trauma as a singular event, but it is not. It's essentially death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yes.
We accumulate trauma over time. Our response to the environment amplifies that experience. We become triggered when we experience something similar to trauma that we've experienced in the past.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole generation of us that whenever we hear an airplane fly over low and loud, we remember 9/11.
Right.
And that's a trigger. If you've been in a car accident and you come to a similar intersection, you tense up because the body keeps the score.
Right.
And, it's the world is full of triggers. It could be the way the light shines through a window, as simple as that reminds you of a traumatic situation and the way the light was shining through the window. And we live in this environment where we are perpetually reminded of the bad things that have happened to us. And that's the point where the magic comes in. And the magic being helping people to understand that they don't have to respond to those factors the way that their body tells them to.
Yes.
You can stop, you can take a deep breath, you can tell yourself something different when you experience that. And this becomes a perpetuating cycle of, rather than reacting to it and being driven by that, to recognizing it and understanding that you have the ability to move forward in a different path, in a way that's not driven by trauma. And that, on the surface, it sounds incredibly simplistic.
Yeah.
But it's anything but that, because you're fighting every single urge and every single cell in your body to go the opposite direction. So, typically trauma brings about fear.
Yes.
And fear is really frustration, anger, emotions. FE is frustration, emotions, anger, and regression. And we need to change that to become something of faith in yourself and faith in others, evaluating the situations, appraising how you can act differently, and then leading you into recovery so that you do react differently. And we can change that paradigm, but it doesn't happen overnight.
I wish. I really do. I keep wishing it too. And I'm so glad that you explained that in the way that you did. Because when it comes down to it, it can be really simple actually, but your brain has gone through so much that you have to change it. So you have to do so much work to get it to do that. If you want it to be the effortlessness feeling of like, okay, something just horrible happened. I'm going to take a breath and I'm just going to walk away for a second and then I'll be able to revisit it. That would be fantastic if that was how it happened at first. And some people are able to do that because maybe their level of trauma isn't as high. I know that it's relative. So, something that I experience may not be as painful for somebody else to experience because they don't have my brain. That being said, I do think that it would be difficult for anyone to experience any level of trauma. It's going to impact you in some way. You just may be able to handle it or heal from it, maybe a little easier. It just depends on your life experience. What kind of a family were you born into? How did you guys handle things growing up? What were your relationships like with your friends and your family? There's understanding who you are and how you got to where you are is super important when it just comes to being able to live with yourself moving forward. Like that's kind of how I look at it, because there is so much shame, like you mentioned before, around things that you so wish didn't happen, whether you had anything to do with it or not. You're like, why is this part of my story? Why? And I will catch myself being not very nice to myself frequently, even this morning, and Brett's looking at me like he knows because I'm driving 40 minutes away and I'm thinking that I'm preparing ahead of time. And although there's always an argument for me where I'm like, well, I could have done a little bit better there. I could have done this, or I try to avoid the I should have. Because I was told, my therapist, amazing person. I'm so thankful that I was brought to her of all people during like this period of my life, because she was really good at reinforcing the it is not your fault before I was even at the point where I could say that something bad was happening to me. She was telling me I wasn't crazy before I really felt it. And I don't want to use the word crazy, but if I'm going to be honest about having complex PTSD, you're thinking about how you feel crazy. You're like, why am I so emotional right now? Why am I so bothered right now? Because now, like when it's the whole be here now concept, you recognize that nothing is happening to you right now. You're just sitting here. You're processing. You're thinking about it. But your body does not feel like you're just sitting here. It feels like it is in some sort of battle that you've experienced before. You might not be able to pinpoint it right away, but you know that something's up. And you're like, okay, what's going on? Like, where am I? What year am I in? And I know that my trauma has impacted my relationships because after I process something, I can see where, say I'm like with my boyfriend, something happens. It's not a bad thing, but it reminds me of something that has happened. and then I can't necessarily see the person there anymore. I'm like, now I kind of fear you. Now I'm not certain of what's happening. And I do feel like that can ruin people's relationships. And I almost I feel as if that probably happens with people more frequently than they realize. And And so talk a little bit about that, like how it shows up for relationships and hurts relationships. And when I say relationships, I don't even mean just romantic partners, but it can hurt your relationship with your kids. It can hurt your relationship with your parents and your siblings and people that you want to be close to. And I feel like some of that it's a hard thing to understand sometimes when you're struggling more than other people. And they're like, I don't understand what's up with you. I know you as being someone who is different than this. So I'm not really sure what to do. But just talk a little bit about that.
So individuals who have experienced trauma resist getting close to people. It's difficult to be close to people when you're afraid of being hurt.
Yes.
It's difficult to be close to people if you're afraid your responses are going to hurt them.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this epidemic in the United States of loneliness.
Yes.
And I would argue that the epidemic of loneliness is in part because of people's fear of being close to one another. We're moving further and further and further apart as a society. Even though being online feels like you're connected to somebody, you're really not. You know, the number of friends you have on Facebook doesn't really equate to the number of friends you have. In part, this is complicated by the fight or flight mechanism that Walter Cannon defined in the 1930s, of when you are encountering something that is potentially harmful, the brainstem kicks in for survival mechanisms. The only part of our brain that survived from Neanderthal caveman time is the brainstem, and it houses the fight or flight mechanism in the amygdala, a very little piece of your brain that drives a lot of your behaviors. And you know, your body responds when the fight or flight or freeze mechanism kicks in. And I want to talk about freeze because when people start getting close to you, you freeze. When people start getting too close and asking too many questions, it becomes difficult to reciprocate when you've had trauma. So we freeze and we don't say, oh, gee, I have large levels of serum cortisol coursing through my brains.
Yeah.
Right.
Although you could. I mean, it's
you could say that.
It is my goal to get people to understand like just the biologic part, because then it removes the shame and the
Yes.
horror that we have around our emotional experiences. Like, it is biological. You cannot
Yes.
change your biology right now. It's just how
really
you were
can.
made. Yes.
Yeah, you
Yes.
really can. And to add to that, the emerging research on epigenetics that suggests that the traumas experienced by your mother, your father, your grandmother, your grandfather on both sides is to a degree encoded in the genes that became you.
Yes.
So not only are you fighting your traumatic experiences, if this epigenetic work begins to pan out, we have a greater understanding of it's your grandparents, it's your lineage catching up with you in your response to the daily challenges you face.
Which I think, well, I'm smiling so much because for me, that's exciting news to know, because it changes a lot about how we operate as human beings and how we understand each other and how we can better work together in order to make it so that this is a world where we can all thrive, because we understand how we work at the biological level. And then you understand, like, it's okay to talk about some of the things that you experience. It's okay for your family to share that with you as well, because if anything, it'll help you to understand your responses, how you react in certain situations, and then you can be more conscious of it. You can recognize, I don't have to live this way. I don't have to respond this way. There is a healthier, more peaceful way of being. It does not include ignoring the emotion that I'm experiencing. I have to comb through that to figure out how this is happening and why this matters to me. But if I'm able to realize my behavior has been shockingly similar to how like a parent would have reacted in a situation like this, like I can also like not be upset with myself for not handling a situation the way that I really wanted to. I think we can all look at our childhoods and be like, well, I wouldn't have done that, and I'm not gonna do that. You're probably gonna do that. You're probably going to. You are.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's because it was passed down. It's not because this person was so wrong. This person was doing the very best that they could, most likely, with what they had. And I bet you that they even did additional work to figure out, okay, what is the right way to handle this? But it doesn't mean that they necessarily knew, because who knew if that information was even readily available? What I'm excited about is that it is now, that it is. That's huge. And if you are able to open yourself up to understand it and then make those changes within your life, it does take a whole lot of work to actually do that, because I have told people before, I healed intellectually first. I learned all about this and I was super jazzed. And I was like, okay, well now I know everything and I'm totally gonna nail this whole life thing. Like I'm gonna heal my trauma. I'm gonna help my kids heal, and I'm gonna like raise them in just this really graceful way, because now I know what to do. And it's different when you're in the moment. When you experience that emotional reaction, that now, and you might have to clarify this for me, because sometimes I'm like, so say I do something that my mom did. Is it because I saw my mom do it, or is it more because that is what has been passed down in my brain? It triggers that response for me to act in the same way.
So that's actually a yes and.
Okay.
It was passed down to you and you witnessed it. And I love your example, and I love the way that of the example of the parent doing it. You're saying, I will never do that with my kids. And then, of course, you did it with your kid.
And I should clarify, I do have great parents. Like, I don't want to, I love my mom. I think she did a great job. I think that like most parents, she was burnt out. And I can relate to that in a way that I could never, ever, ever, ever shame her for responding in any kind of way that I may have felt was harsh when I was little, because I'm sure that I felt, I'm so sensitive. Like I truly am. I'm like, my brain is an emotional brain. I don't know if that sets me apart from other people, but I recognize that. And so it really doesn't take much to hurt my feelings. Although I would never, ever admit to you that you hurt my feelings, only now in life will I actually say that. It was a big secret before. And she honestly, I think she's just like, I don't remember anything upsetting you. And I'm like, I know, I never would tell you because I didn't want to.
I would never say it because you hold things in, too.
Yes, 100%.
And it is so fascinating to me that so many people come up to me and say, I earned the worst parent in the world award yesterday. And I don't even know how I got there, but I was interacting with my kids and this happened, and I feel horrible about it. And again, it's like, you know what? This isn't anything that you planned. This isn't anything that you wanted to happen.
Yeah.
It's just something that happens. Life happens and things spin off the rails so quickly before we even realize that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's one of those difficult things where you tend to hurt the people you love the most,
Yeah.
even though that's the last thing you would ever want to do, because you hurt the people that you're closest to. And why is that? Because of proximity. You spend more time with those people, so there's more opportunities for those kind of interactions to occur that, albeit not intended,
Mm-hmm.
and it still occurs.
Right.
And those are the challenges that we have. But the gift is that, knowing about it doesn't immediately stop it. That's the estrangement between knowing and doing. You can know everything about something, but the ability to do it in the moment
Yes.
isn't an equal part.
Yes.
They're not parallel,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So having all of the knowledge is only step one. And then step two is practicing that knowledge and practicing and practicing and practicing it for about 10,000 to 20,000 hours. And then it might become part of your being. But you're still fighting the biology. And it's still a challenge. And none of us are ever perfect.
Right. I wonder, like, okay, so I was actually trying to calculate how many hours have I been doing this? I hate that that's what I was thinking, because I'm like, okay, so how well am I doing? That's just, I don't know if that's biology for me. I always have to know. I've at least gotten better about not competing with other people. I still have this, like, I don't know if it's competitive spirit within myself, but I'm really like, when I get really driven to do something, I do it. And this has been hands down the hardest challenge that I have faced. And it is for a myriad of reasons, I'm sure. The time of life that I'm in. I have 2 young children. So you already got like, you're on the tire side. But then I also have all of this it is complex trauma. The situations that I experience that have affected me the most, still at times I still have a hard time understanding some of it. And it's been years. Like when it comes to sexual assault, or even like psychologically being abused, and so like you're behaving in ways that don't feel good to yourself. You're like living against yourself when you are under this this fog, I guess. That's probably the best way also to explain how you live when you are experiencing that in the moment. It like feels almost like your spirit or your character is under attack when you have this energy coming at you. And I'm sure that all of that is what makes it a challenge to heal from trauma. And I can say that it's like a 1 step forward, 2 steps back comes sometimes. They say that like when you start healing, you actually start unraveling. And to most, that's going to be when they're like, what is happening? And I would imagine, in my experience, I'm not so sure that it was, you do avoid connection when you're going through this. And like, I've definitely wanted to be more open about what I'm experiencing, because I don't want anyone else to go through it alone. And I don't want anyone else to feel alone. I have definitely felt alone, not completely alone, because I've been lucky to find other people who can relate to me on certain levels. And not everybody can. And I don't expect everyone to be able to relate to everyone on all of these different levels. But it's great to have the few connections that you do. But I can say, like, you do start to pull yourself away from others, because if you're not feeling like you're emotionally regulated, you're like, okay, well, they can't see this part of me, because I struggle with even understanding this part of me. And I think that I mean, I'm definitely not the only person to do that. I think a lot of people do that. But then I think there's also like the behavior changes in that person that make other people want to pull away from you too. And then it makes sense that we have a lot of drug addicts and we have a lot of alcoholism, and we have, because they're not getting that human connection, that sense of togetherness and love and understanding that they so desperately need. Because I think like when it comes down to it, that's what we all need. That's a basic human need for survival is that feeling of togetherness and having people with you, because loneliness, like you mentioned, is an epidemic. I would say that we're probably, I mean, when it comes to COVID, so we're a few years out from that now. And I would venture to say that now is really a time that if you haven't started assessing what your experience was like with COVID, you may need to start looking at your everyday behaviors and seeing how that changed you. And that took us all apart. Like, 9/11 was different. It was, at least in my experience, I felt people come together a little bit after that. It was the whole idea of I remember I was in 6th grade. So my memory of it is of like someone who didn't really understand what was happening at the time. Obviously I've learned about it since, I understand. But when I was younger, we learned about rallying around the flag after that. And so that was like, we're all coming together as one after this traumatic experience. Just using that as an example to set up for the difference that COVID, when it comes to a trauma, how that was, because that took us all apart. And if you could explain what that kind of trauma has done to people and how it may be lurking unseen for many, I think that would be really great information to have.
Oh gosh, unpacking this.
Let's unpack COVID. Go. It's a lot, right?
In less than a 3-hour lecture.
I know. We don't have enough time for it today, but I think just of the most general sense, I think it would really help to maybe spark some thoughts.
So, okay, several points though from what you were just saying, because you made several really excellent points in there, is that, recovery is not a linear process. There are steps forward, there are steps backwards, there are steps sideways, and we do tend to be hard on ourselves when we say things like, I should be over this by now. But there is no expectation for when your body heals and your brain heals. We are dealing with a brain illness here.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, you talked about substance use disorder and the strong correlation between substance use disorder and trauma. I would argue that in many cases, individuals are traumatized and they find substances mitigate that discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes an issue of its own, and it takes on a life of its own. Now let's get to the unpacking of COVID. And it's not just COVID, because if it were a pandemic in and of itself, we would be able to compare COVID to the Spanish flu of the early 1900s.
Right. That makes sense.
But we cannot. And we cannot because of the polarization that was occurring in the United States, and by the way, continues to occur in the United States.
Right.
Even at a higher level today than it was in 2020. When you had healthcare workers walking into the hospital being cheered, but then at the same time, they were being berated by family members saying this isn't even real.
Right.
You have, people working in grocery stores because they were essential workers scared to death that they were going to contract this and die, but yet they had to keep their job as a cashier. I was working in a hospital at the time, and it was devastating to see what staff are going through.
Mm-hmm.
And this is at a different level of trauma, because this is a trauma that's occurring at a level that was tearing families apart because
Right.
of different beliefs.
Yes.
This is a level that was tearing communities apart because of the different beliefs held. And people were ghosting one another on social media. People were attacking one another on social media. And the world seemed to take a turn
Mm-hmm.
at that point that is trauma reinforcing, that is not as predictable as one once thought, it's not as safe as one once thought. And this is the difference between, if you're just dealing with a virus, as they were with the Spanish flu, and there wasn't any big push saying, no, this isn't real, this isn't true, or this is who we blame for it.
Right.
Um, but that's not the world we lived in now. In 1900, if you read the Wall Street Journal or any newspaper cover to cover, that's about the amount of information that our grandparents took in a single lifetime.
Right. And
And that's
they may not have questioned it, or I mean, I guess that could go down an entire other rabbit hole, because I always wonder like how people interpret the information that they read, because obviously not everybody believes it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the sources are pushing different
Right.
viewpoints.
Yeah.
And now people are going to the source that reinforces their viewpoint,
Right.
where they're not getting the other side of the story. So it must be true if it's on the internet.
Right.
Uh,
It
and
gets more
and that
complicated.
that is such a complicating factor
Mm-hmm.
that, there are other factors that tie into this. For example, that some people, such as myself, that has a training and background in research and science, that I tend to lean toward fact. And there are other people who tend to lead to emotion
Mm-hmm.
in their decision making process. It's much easier to drive behavior when you're leaning towards emotion.
Right.
So this is yet another complicating factor, that not everybody understands or believes science because they don't understand it.
Right.
But they do understand that if they have an emotional response to it, then that must be true.
Yeah. Because they think that that's
And
themselves right there, just telling them like what's right and what's wrong.
correct.
Yeah.
And there's no absence of people today willing to tell people what's right and what's wrong.
Right. It's fact. That's a fact. No, you are correct. I think, and that's so when you talk about like the whole emotional response to things, that's when we start getting into the whole like emotional awareness and the EQ side of things and the understanding of how your emotions even work. And that's also an exciting piece of this, because of like just all of the things that we don't realize about our emotions. They have their purpose, but they are not truth. And everything that you think is not necessarily real, I guess. Like, your thoughts are just thoughts sometimes. Like there's room to question them. And your emotions, I have learned that if you're going to question anyone or anything, first let it be yourself, but with kindness and compassion, because who's going to understand you better than you? Arguably nobody. But at the same time, like if you're someone who has trauma or a human being just in general, there's a good chance that you're not really taking the time to understand yourself, especially with the truth that comes with trauma being passed down from generation to generation because it's in a certain part of your brain, like that you don't control, that you have, it's literally like if you were to look at a brain, it would be great if you could just point it out, be like, okay, and so here's what you got from your mom. She's over here. Like, that if you think about it in that way, then it just, for me, it was a light bulb. It was a greater understanding, and it was super helpful in giving me what I needed in order to reassure myself that I wasn't hopeless. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't, I wasn't stupid. I wasn't all of these things that I was telling myself before. Like, come on, Hattie, figure this out. Like, I wasn't all of those things that I had originally thought. I was the culmination of many things, and I get the choice to relieve myself of the pressure that comes with holding on to that, because it is like a physical experience. Like you're essentially carrying weight within your body. Like at least that's how I've experienced it, that you are able to put down after a while, once you can experience the peace that you can get to with it. And that doesn't even, like, we're not even talking about how to heal it right now. I understand, like, we're not even giving people that kind of information, and that might just have to be a whole other conversation. But I feel like the general understanding of it, and your emotions, and understanding if you have big emotions or if you don't. Do you struggle with empathy, or are you too empathetic? Are you do you struggle with anger? Are you suppressing your anger versus expressing it in a healthy way? Like, anger comes out in bad behaviors sometimes, screaming, hitting, hurting, but you're not going to avoid anger. You are going to have to figure out how to process it, though, in a way that doesn't harm others or yourself.
Right. And that's a learned skill. So much of recovery is a learned skill and then applying that skill, not just reacting. We tend, in this day and age, to want immediate response. And sometimes immediate response is not the best response. Sometimes we need to slow down and ask ourselves, why am I responding this way? What is it that is driving me to feel this way? And I wish one of the things that was getting more emphasis is on EQ versus IQ,
Mm-hmm.
because you can have the highest IQ in the world and still make horrible decisions.
Correct. Yes. Very true.
And really, when you take the time to slow down and ask yourself, why am I responding this way? Why am I feeling this way? This is when you start to learn and you start to grow and you start to question. As you said, if you don't know yourself, then you really can't have any impact over where your life is going.
It's the control you have, the little
That's
control you have.
correct.
Yeah.
That's all you have. And to take that a step further then, and what I see you have done is that when you step outside of yourself and are able to help others, that's when the real healing occurs. You know that you're on the path to recovery when you're making your efforts to heal others and to help others to understand. Maybe they don't need healed. Maybe they just need to understand in a different way how they are experiencing their lives. And, it would be, I think, a much kinder and gentler world if we were to all dedicate ourselves to helping others to understand this process. But sadly, that's not how the world works. but it is a process that can gain strength. It is a process that can happen in ways that people share kind things that happen to them with others. And it is contagious.
Yes.
Maybe not as contagious as some of the other things that are going on, but it is contagious.
I
So
would say, oh, go ahead.
I really think that introspection and self-understanding is the right pathway to getting people through the traumas they've experienced. You have to take time, and it's hard because it's painful to revisit those things.
For sure.
But you don't get past them until you unpack them and look at them for the truth of what they are and ask yourself, how can I respond differently moving forward? And even though you don't always respond differently, you've got a goal in your mind. And that's the goal that we're working towards. Will you do it perfectly every time? Absolutely not, because we're humans and humans don't do anything perfectly.
Right. In the design again.
But it's a desire to do things right
Mm-hmm.
and to do things better that makes us better people and makes the world a better place.
Beautifully said. And it's like, and I could sit here too. I'm like, I mean, yeah, all we need is love. Like it kind of gives that feeling to it. But like, it's, you do kind of, love can be very complicated, at least like it is right now. But at the basis of it all, it's like, it's understanding without judgment. It's, it's basically coming to terms with yourself without shaming yourself. It's understanding and being compassionate towards yourself, towards others. It doesn't mean you accept bad behavior. But you can perhaps understand it a little bit more and then set the boundary that is required in order for you to maintain your own good feelings about yourself and your life, because the good feelings are what create even better feelings. And that's coming from someone who I felt like I was a joyful person before. And right now it feels like as if it was a long time ago that I was a joyful person. I think when being on air, everyone would say that I was definitely a joyful person. I definitely came across as that. And there was joy in my life for sure. Like, don't get me wrong. I was able to find like those joyful pockets. It wasn't, I had a harder time experiencing joy within the last 3 years because of how difficult it was for me to work through what had happened, what was happening still, and then just the overall difficulties of raising 2 kids and doing it alone, doing it without my family support system nearby. So like for me, I can at least look at these few years with compassion and say, you did your best, and you honestly, like, you were relatively successful in your journey and what you were doing. Like, was I really killing it at work? No, no, I wasn't at all. I couldn't. I got by. Was I killing it as a mom? In my opinion, absolutely not. Like, I did not live up to what my expectations of myself were or what I knew was best, because intellectually I knew what the kids needed. And I arguably, yes, I still gave them what they needed, but I didn't do it in the way that like I expected me to do. But now I know, even now I know that I did everything that was within my power at the time. And I know now, thankfully, the work that I put in, the grueling work that was mostly inner work. I think, like I said, I don't think anyone's going to see the last 3 years and be like, oh, you were so successful in all your areas of life. I wasn't. I got by, but internally I grew a lot, and I'm still figuring it out. And I recognize that. and I can at least change the narrative in my head, which I think took a long time to get to for me to actually be able to encourage myself, for me to actually be grateful for the progress that I've made and the journey that I made it through. And being able to see that, okay, I'm maybe not on completely the other side of this. It's not nostalgic for me yet. It's not like totally free from everything. But it is like the light is there. The positive reinforcement, it's on the tip of my tongue. Like it is, I'm ready to be kinder to myself and to see where I can go from here. And I recognize that there's still parts of my brain that are not ready for what I want it to do. Like I still have areas where I'm like, I'm recognizing that cognitively, I'm not where I was. I don't like it's maybe the intellectual side is like, I'm exhausted here. So we're not going to do this just yet. We can't. So I move slower now. I have to move a lot slower. And I also like found out that I have chronic Lyme disease, which may impact that even more because it's like, it affects your brain and your nervous system as well. So it's rough. But the words of encouragement for others are so important. And I know that like we've been talking for a while now, Brett, I'm not sure where we are on time, but I just wanted to give you a moment to share some of the extra work that you have been doing. And I want to talk to you again because we have to talk about like actually how to heal. I think we've given like the general baseline and I have tried lots of different things. So there's so many different ways that you can do this. Like, it's the onion, like you're just going to keep peeling back and there's a lot of different ways to do it. So it's way more time than what we have. But for the work that you've been doing, if you could just share a little bit with the audience about what that is and, where they can find it and what like your hope is for the future with everything that you have learned and continue to learn.
Well, having retired is interesting. As I was listening to you talk, I was very much relating that in the process, it feels like chaos.
Yeah.
And you're in there and you're fighting it and you're doing the best you can every day. And it is a battle. It's a daily battle. But, now that I've retired and I reflect back, it almost seems like this was a well-developed plan. The career, the doctoral work, the advanced degrees, the publications, the building the trauma recovery center.
Yeah.
It almost looks like I knew what I was doing, but at the moment it felt like anything but that. And I think that's so true that we're so busy fighting the moment that we don't see the progress that we're making. The goal is looking at substance use disorders and helping people to tie trauma to the impact on substance use disorders and their development. The work is on fueling the research moving forward with trauma-informed care. The fifth edition of the Crisis Intervention Handbook coming out on Oxford University Press in June has a huge focus on trauma-informed care in people who are experiencing crises, because crisis and trauma go hand in hand, and moving that knowledge forward, developing the evidence of what are the best approaches to heal. And I would love to have that conversation with you going down the road, because there is very strong evidence out there about healing process. There is growing evidence every single day about how most effectively to treat trauma. And finally, I think probably the most important thing is understanding different areas of life that are impacted by trauma. You, as a journalist, have been more impacted by trauma because of your work.
Right.
Healthcare professionals, first responders,
Yeah.
are all impacted by secondary trauma or vicarious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And, then it leads to the next question of what is it that is coming into our lives that is vicarious trauma? And you can put that down to the folks that are doom scrolling on their news feed every single day,
Absolutely.
which is vicarious traumatization.
Absolutely.
If you have an older adult in your life that's watching a 24-hour news channel, tell them to turn it off. They'll feel a lot better.
I promise you it's true. And I'm glad that you brought up the journalism aspect, because I think about it all the time, and I think about my friends. I think about various newsrooms that I've been a part of and people that I've known. And I mean, you talk about your work a lot, but at the end of the day, I don't know if there's the intentionality around understanding how certain things that you've seen, or you've had to write about, or you've had to argue about with coworkers about how you're going to report it, and the high intense stress that you experience in those situations. And I think journalists are good about talking about things with each other. So there is a level of depth, I would say, in a newsroom that is helpful. But at the same time, I don't know if the understanding is there. And I really encourage any journalist who is listening to this to start looking at the neuroscience of trauma and recognizing what the nervous system's job is and what happens when it's not working properly. And use your journalistic abilities that you've learned to investigate yourself, and then use what you've learned when talking to anyone and when you're reporting on stories, because my perception of everything has changed. And not that I would do my job incredibly different than what I did, because I still in hindsight can see that I think I had the right perspective. But just having understood more of what impacted me in that job also makes a difference. And I think that work atmospheres everywhere would understand that it was best for them to change certain processes in order to aid in that nervous system regulation, because it impacts everything, including your productivity. And if you want people to be productive and you want them to do a good job, then you will have to recognize that their nervous system is going to not have to be frazzled. It can't, you can't have that response. So I'm glad that you brought that up, and I'm really excited to talk more about everything that is happening and how we all can benefit from learning more about it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I look forward to those conversations.
Dr. Ken Yeager, thank you so much for joining us. Clearly, we could both talk for hours, and I'm looking forward to that. I want everybody to be able to find more information on this topic. The OSU STAR program can be a resource for you. We brought up the book, The Body Keeps the Score. It is helpful information. You can find me on Facebook, just search Hattie Hawks. And I hope to be speaking with all of you soon. Spirit of EQ podcast. You can get more of information there. So thank you so much for joining us. Joy is on the horizon, so stick with me for that, and have yourself a wonderful day and week. Take care of yourself.